The silence that dominates the Everglades today is not the peaceful rest of nature. It is the heavy, suffocating sound of an ecosystem that has been systematically silenced by an unseen force. In the deep heart of Florida, something has transformed this lush paradise into a vast, sterile cemetery. Trail cameras, hidden deep within the sawgrass, have captured the absolute impossible. Hour after hour of footage reveals nothing but the lonely swaying of the tall, sharp grass. There are no glowing eyes reflecting the infrared light, and no sound of paws hitting the mud. The raccoons and opossums, once the heartbeat of the swamp, have been effectively erased. Leaked data from frustrated researchers shows a collapse that defies all biological logic. In the core zones, mammal populations have crashed by a staggering 99%, silence so heavy it feels like physical pressure now hangs over the dark waters. It is the first clue that something has gone terribly, horribly wrong beneath the sun. The swamp is not just changing, it is being sterilized by a predator that never tires. The Burmese python, a giant reaching 20 feet, was always the primary suspect, but the math held by the biologists never quite added up to this level of total ruin. 300,000 snakes cannot explain a collapse this absolute and this fast. There is something much darker hidden in the toxic mist of these forgotten places. The terror is not just what devours the flesh, but the fear that paralyzes the mind. The remaining animals have changed their very souls just to survive another night. They have stopped moving, stopped breeding, and stopped fighting for their lineage. They can smell the rot of their kin floating on the humid, stagnant night air. The footage recovered shows a landscape of desolation that no one was prepared to see. A forest that should be screaming with life is now a vacuum of heavy dead air. Where there should be a vibrant food chain, there is only the sound of the wind. Florida is being consumed from the inside out by a monster we cannot fully track. This biological vacuum stretches for miles across the black, unmoving swamp water. The mud trails no longer record the paw prints of the native predators that once ruled. The absence of life is a silent scream echoing through the cypress knees and vines. Every frame of the security footage is a grim record of a total, unrecoverable loss. Scientists watch their monitors with blood turned cold by the lack of any movement. There are no rabbits crossing the roads, and no marsh birds diving for their prey. The entire hierarchy of life has been interrupted by a brutal and sudden force. What remains is a hollow shell of a world that was once magnificent and loud. The moisture in the swamp seems to carry the crushing weight of 1,000 lost souls. The vegetation grows unchecked over the remains of a world that has stopped pulsing. It is an ethnic cleansing of the fauna, executed with a terrifying surgical precision. The waters reflect only the gray, indifferent sky, hiding the bones of the fallen. The silent invasion left no traces of a struggle or any form of early resistance. It was a smooth transition from a land of plenty to a world of absolute nothingness. Each species that vanishes leaves a black hole in the delicate fabric of our reality, and that hole is growing larger, swallowing everything that dares to breathe in the dark. The song of the cicadas has been replaced by a static low hum of dread. The night in the Everglades lost its spirit to an invader that has no face. No one was ready for the sheer scale of this invisible and relentless extermination. The swamp has become a mirror of a real, living post-apocalyptic nightmare. The roots of the mangroves now guard secrets that the living are afraid to uncover. The silt hides the evidence of a massacre that happened without a single sound. Central Florida watches with growing horror as this dead frontier moves closer to home. What began as a whispered rumor has become a documented statistic of finality. With every sunset, the darkness brings a chill that has nothing to do with weather. It is the coldness of a place where life has decided that the struggle is over. The shadows appear longer and more dense than the laws of physics should allow. The void is the only thing that truly prospers in these dying, stagnant waters. Field investigators report a constant feeling of being watched by the swamp itself, but there are no visible eyes, only the heavy perception of a hostile, hidden presence. The predator is everywhere, and, at the exact same time, it is nowhere to be found. The sterilization of the soil is merely the prelude to a much larger disaster. Without the small mammals, the very forest begins to wither away in the silence. The seeds are no longer spread, and the balance of the plants is lost forever. It is a domino effect that is toppling the ancient architecture of the natural world. Moonlight reflects off waters where nothing dares to swim or jump anymore. The glow is cold and metallic, stripped of any trace of biological warmth or hope. The camera records are the proof of a massive crime against the natural creation. A crime where the perpetrator still walks free among the thickening shadows. The hunting trails are now just paths leading toward a total, dark oblivion. The memory of what the swamp used to be is fading along with the old stories. New generations will never know the glory of the wild world that once thrived here. They will only document the terrifying speed at which the emptiness expands. The atmospheric pressure in South Florida feels like a storm that never breaks. Rain does not wash away the trail of destruction left by the scaled invader. It only buries the evidence deeper under a layer of thick, muddy brown water. Fear has infiltrated the very DNA of the creatures that are still trying to hold on. The instinct to survive has been replaced by a desperate, hopeless instinct to flee. But there is nowhere to run when your own home has become your greatest enemy. There is no refuge in the lowlands of the American peninsula for the weak. The official narrative speaks of control, but the reality on the ground screams defeat. The maps of biodiversity are being redrawn with a thick, black ink of death. Every monitoring station is a tombstone for a species that is no longer there. The silence in the Everglades is the final signature on a contract of extinction. Birds of prey circle over nothing, searching for a meal that does not exist. Their cries echo without an answer, lost in the vastness of the dying marsh. The base of the pyramid was removed, leaving the top to crumble into the dirt. This is a cruel lesson in the fragility of the balance that sustains our lives. The smell of decay is rare, as there is nothing left for the rot to consume. The efficiency of the predator is so great that it eats even the last evidence. Bones are dissolved by the acid in the water and the relentless march of time. What is left is a dreamscape that rapidly turns into a waking, dark nightmare. Human time does not apply to this process of slow and agonizing death. Nature is dying on a scale that we do not have the tools to properly measure. It is a silent genocide occurring right beneath our feet and our modern noses. The only thing left for us to do is observe and document the final breath. The cameras now capture only the wake of an invisible, creeping destruction. The void is the protagonist of every video and every photograph ever taken. Florida has become the stage for a massive experiment in total extinction, and the public is watching, helpless, as the heavy curtains finally fall down. The end will not be announced with loud trumpets, but with one last gasp. The gasp of a creature that found no mate to continue its ancient line. After that, there will only be the eternal and oppressive silence of the void. The silence that now reigns supreme in the dark heart of the Florida Glades. The world is watching a tragedy that cannot be undone by any human hand. Every hour that passes, the emptiness gains more ground toward the cities. The borders of the disaster are moving north, toward the homes of the men. What began in the swamp is now scratching at the doors of our civilization. There are no locks that can hold back the hunger of what lives in the dark. Infrared cameras detect no heat, only the lingering chill of a world long dead. Desolation is the new norm, the new standard of beauty for the Sunshine State. A tragic beauty based entirely on absence and the total loss of memory. The journals of the Rangers have become records of deep and lasting depression. No one wants to be the witness to the final end of a biological era, but they are the chroniclers of this final and irremediable collapse of life. The stillness of the water is an invitation for the most disturbing thoughts. What is hidden under the surface that even the cameras cannot see today? The psychological horror of not knowing what waits for you is constant. The imagination fills the void with monsters that may actually be very real. The foundation of life in the Everglades has been eroded to the very core. The pillars that held up diversity were kicked down one by one in the night. The result is a natural ruin, a monument to our own cultural negligence. And the wind blows through the ruins, carrying the heavy scent of the end. Have you ever stopped to think that the videos you just watched with flawless scripts and engaging narrations might have been created by someone who never even touched a camera or a microphone? There is a new digital elite profiting heavily behind the scenes of YouTube and social media, building massive channels without ever showing their faces or spending thousands of dollars on equipment. While most people are frozen by the fear of being on camera, these individuals are using the hidden power of artificial intelligence to generate automated content that works and earns for them 24 hours a day. The secret to dominating this game isn't about having a famous face. It's about knowing how to command the right tools to create scripts, voices, and visuals that magnetically hold the audience's attention. I've gained access to a strategic method that reveals the exact roadmap for you to build your own invisible digital empire. Mastering AI to turn clicks into a real source of income. It is the perfect opportunity for those seeking financial and geographical freedom without having to deal with the pressure of being a public figure on the internet. Best of all, you can seize this opportunity right now for a symbolic price. The complete training is under an exclusive promotion, dropping from $97 to just $17. This is your passport to unlocking the knowledge you need to start your professional journey with AI today. Click the first link in the description to secure your spot while this discount is still active. Everything leads back to a single, chaotic night in August of '92. Hurricane Andrew roared like a demon through the coastal cities of the South. While metal was twisted and homes were leveled, a dark fate was sealed. A facility for breeding exotic reptiles was torn apart by the storm's fury. Hundreds of small serpents were launched into the blackness of the winds. They were not just animals, they were the seeds of a future destruction. The wind carried them into the protected depths of the humid, wet swamp. There, they found the perfect soil to grow without any human supervision. The story of the hurricane is the official tale that comforts the public mind, but the truth is far more shameful and tied to our own human greed. The exotic pet market turned Florida into a ticking biological time bomb. People bought dangerous creatures as if they were nothing but plastic toys. In the street fairs, pythons were sold for just a few measly dollars. They were small, colorful, and looked harmless in their little glass boxes. But the growth of these animals is an unstoppable force of nature. In just a few months, the pet becomes a hungry predator of 2 meters. Terrified owners, seeing their cats in danger, made a series of fatal choices. They drove to the deserted roads and opened the cages in the tall grass. They believed they were giving freedom to an animal they once loved. In reality, they were releasing a biological virus into the state's heart. The Florida swamp is a climatic mirror of the hot Southeast Asian jungle. The constant heat and extreme humidity are the fuel for the python's fire. But there was one fatal difference. The native prey was completely innocent. No animal in Florida evolved to deal with a giant, crushing constrictor. A python does not hunt like a wolf. It waits like a patient, dark shadow. It camouflages in the brush until it is indistinguishable from the mud. By the time the prey notices, it is already far too late for any reaction. The embrace of death is slow, breaking bones and stopping the blood flow. The lack of natural predators allowed them to reign over the land alone. Nothing in Florida, except the alligator, could ever challenge their size. And even the gators began to lose epic battles in the dark, murky waters. The balance of millions of years was shattered in less than 3 decades. A single female python is a biological factory of total animal extermination. She can carry up to 100 eggs in a single yearly nesting cycle. Multiply that by the thousands of snakes hidden in the thick, wet bush. The result is an invasion that is impossible to contain by any human hand. The government tried to act, but was always a step behind the biology. Bounty hunters were hired to patrol the canals with hooks and bags. Annual challenges were created to lure civilians into the bloody killing, but for every snake caught, 1,000 new ones hatched in the center. While we focused on the jaws, we ignored what was living on the inside. The python did not just bring its hunger, it brought its ancient parasites. Inside every invader, a much more persistent enemy was traveling along. A lungworm that found in the native snakes a completely defenseless host. Human ignorance allowed this biological bomb to be armed and ready. Hurricane Andrew only lit the fuse of a disaster that was already told. What followed was a silent and relentless colonization of the moist soil. Florida was sold, piece by piece, by irresponsible owners and greed. The trail of the snakes now marks the map of every southern county. They move through canals, sewers, and the backyards of the suburbs. There is no physical barrier that can stop such a resilient cold animal. The invasion is geographical, biological, and above all else, definitive. Stories of snakes coming out of toilets became a terrifying reality. The psychological terror of knowing something lives under you is constant. The safety of urban life was violated by a monster from the deep swamp, and the monster is getting bigger, stronger, and more numerous every day. The ecosystem was forced to accept a new master without any fight. The food chains were rewritten with the blood of the local innocents. The economic and environmental impact is beyond any human calculation. Florida is paying the price for years of neglect and exotic luxury. The pythons became the symbol of a nature that is out of our control. They represent the total failure of conservation and management policies. What was a curiosity became an existential threat to the entire state. And the threat is moving north, devouring everything it finds in its path. Each year, the average size of the snakes caught increases in a bizarre way. We are creating super predators in an open-air laboratory of death. The swamp is the perfect incubator for this accelerated, dark growth. What will stop a 7-meter snake in the backyard of a local school? The question is no longer if they will spread, but how far they will go. Global warming is opening new paths toward the colder northern lands. The biological bomb is in a state of slow and prolonged detonation. And we are the helpless witnesses to every fragment that is expelled. The memory of that night in '92 still haunts the swamp veterans. They remember the calm before the storm and the chaos that followed. But no one predicted that the chaos would have scales and infinite hunger. The hurricane passed, but the trail of Andrew still crawls in the mud. The legacy of destruction is visible in every fallen tree and empty nest. The heritage we leave for the future is a desert made of reptiles. Florida is now the world example of how not to manage the wild nature. A case study in real time about the death of a unique and vital biome. Every sunset, the danger becomes more real for those who live nearby. The shadows of the trees seem to move in an independent, eerie way. It is the ancestral fear of being hunted by something that is silent. The fear that the pythons installed in the heart of every local citizen. Authorities try to be optimistic, but the reports say the exact opposite. We are losing the war for territory and for our own survival today. The state's infrastructure was not made to handle such invaders. The pythons are the new owners of the waters, the woods, and secrets. The pet market continues, but the scar on the earth is now permanent. The greed of a few destroyed the natural heritage of millions of souls. The swamp will never be the same, no matter the human effort involved. The transformation is chemical, physical, and irremediably biological. The bomb continues to spread its shards across the entire continent. The impact on endangered species is the final nail in the coffin. Panthers and deer now fight against an enemy they do not understand. The inequality in the fight for life is what makes it so disturbing. The silence of the authorities is as guilty as the hand that let go. Denial allowed the problem to become the master of the entire land. Now we face a giant that cannot be contained or expelled isolely. We are left only to learn how to live in the shadow of its presence. The trail of slime and destruction is the new signature of the landscape. The legacy of Andrew is an open wound that refuses to ever heal. And the poison of this wound is spreading through the entire state. There are no heroes here, only survivors and victims of the bad luck. Nature is charging the bill for decades of disastrous intervention. The price is the loss of one of the wildest and most beautiful places, a loss that will be felt by generations that have not been born yet. Surveillance cameras capture the advance of the snakes in real time. They cross invisible borders, conquering new neighborhoods and woods. The invasion is methodical, silent, and devoid of any kind of mercy. The python is the personification of a force that accepts no deals. Fear infiltrated the bar conversations and the neighborhood meetings. No one is safe as long as there is water for the snakes to swim. The swamp is expanding into the heart of our modern civilization, and civilization does not know how to react to such a primitive foe. The end of Part 2 leaves us in a state of maximum and dark alert. The past explains the present, but offers no solutions for the future. Field researchers began noticing a horrific pattern just a few years ago. They found native pygmy rattlesnakes lying lifeless on the sun-baked trails. There were no bite marks, no crushed bones, and no signs of a struggle. The predators were simply extinguishing, like candles in a cold draft. When they brought these snakes to the lab, the room went dead silent. The lungs of these native survivors were packed with a writhing mass. Dozens of parasitic worms were feeding on the delicate blood vessels. It was a biological horror that no one had predicted or prepared for. The creature was identified as Raillietiella orientalis, the lungworm. This parasite is native to the jungles of Asia, far from these shores. It lived in harmony with the Burmese pythons for millions of years, but in the Florida heat, it has found a new defenseless population. The pythons are asymptomatic carriers, immune to the worm's bite. They carry the plague in their chests while they conquer the mud. But for the native snakes of Florida, the infection is a death sentence. Their immune systems have no maps to fight this alien invader. The parasite does not just live in the lung. It devours the tissue. It causes massive inflammation, blocking the snake's ability to breathe. Footage of infected snakes shows them stretching their necks for air, a desperate silent gasp for oxygen that will never reach their blood. In the final stages, the horror becomes visible to the naked eye. The worms can be seen crawling out of the snake's open mouth. It is a nightmare of efficiency, a cycle that never misses a beat, and the way it spreads is a testament to nature's cruelest designs. It starts with the python leaving its waste in the dark swamp water. The waste is teeming with thousands of microscopic parasite eggs. A cockroach or a beetle feeds on the waste, becoming a vessel. Then, a frog eats the insect, and a native snake eats the frog. Once inside the stomach, the larvae tunnel through the organ walls. They migrate through the body until they reach the sanctuary of the lungs. There, they grow into blood-feeding monsters that choke their host. The native ecosystem is being poisoned by a chain of unintended meals. What makes this truly terrifying is the speed of the expansion. The pythons are limited by the cold, trapped in the southern heat. But the lungworm has jumped ship and no longer needs the python. It is cycling through the native animals and moving rapidly north. Infections have already been documented as far as Jacksonville. The plague is moving faster than the snakes ever could have dreamed. Even if every python vanished tomorrow, the worms would remain. The biological fire is out of control and consuming the state. We are looking at a scenario where the native snakes disappear. Garter snakes, ribbon snakes, and racers are being systematically erased. Without these snakes, the balance of pests and rodents will shatter. The ripple effect of this infection will be felt in every Florida home. The footage of these dying animals is a warning to the world. It shows what happens when we shuffle the deck of global biology. The lungworm is a ghost, an invisible killer that leaves no trace. Only the silence of the woods remains to tell the story of the lost. Researchers are working in shadows, trying to find a way to stop it. But how do you vaccinate a swamp that spans millions of acres? How do you kill a parasite that has integrated into every food chain? The task is impossible, a labor of Sisyphus in the humid heat. The Florida water moccasin seems to be the only one holding on. For some reason, these venomous vipers survive the infection longer. Are they the chosen survivors or just the last ones waiting for the end? The swamp offers no answers, only more questions wrapped in rot. The atmosphere in the labs is one of grim professional defeat. They are documenting an extinction event in real time, frame by frame. The lungworm is the true winner of the invasion, the silent king. It rules from the inside, hidden in the darkness of a failing chest. Every rain brings more eggs into the water, more death to the grass. The cycle is self-sustaining now, a perpetual motion machine of decay. The air in the Everglades feels thick with the spores of the end. It is a heavy, wet blanket that smothers the hope of recovery. People hike through the parks unaware of the wall beneath their feet. They look for gators, but they should be looking for the gasps. The sound of a snake struggling for air is the anthem of the new era. A quiet, pathetic rasping that signals the death of a lineage. We are witnessing the birth of a biological dead zone in the south, a place where only the carriers thrive and the locals wither away. The invisible monster is far more successful than the giant snake. Size was just a distraction. The real threat was always microscopic. The history books will record this as the Great Suffocating, a time when the breath was stolen from the wild heart of Florida. And as the worms move north, the silence follows them like a shadow. Nothing can stop the march of a killer that lives within the blood. The part 3 concludes with the realization of our total helplessness. The enemy is within the gates, and it has already won the first war. Now, we look to the giants of the past to see if they can save us. But even the kings of the forest are facing an uncertain throne. The wind carries the scent of medicine and rot into the night. Every laboratory test confirms the inevitable spread of the plague. The data points on the map are like bloodstains on a white cloth. We are running out of time to save the soul of the southern woods. The parasites do not care about borders or human legislation. They only care about the next lung to inhabit and consume. The biological integrity of the continent is currently under siege, and the siege is being led by a creature smaller than a fingernail. The irony of the situation is not lost on the weary scientists. They fought the dragon, but the flea is what will kill the king. The future of the Florida wilderness hangs by a single, fraying thread, and the weight of the lungworm is pulling it down into the dark. We are witnesses to a tragedy of epic, microscopic proportions. The local fauna is being replaced by a shadow of its former self. The resilience of the earth is being tested to the breaking point, and the breaking point is closer than any of us want to admit. The shadows in the trees are no longer just an optical illusion. They are the ghosts of a diversity that is being choked out of life. The Florida sun continues to shine on a world that is slowly dying, and the water continues to flow, carrying the seeds of the next end. The legacy of the invasion is a permanent scar on the biological map, a scar that will never heal as long as the worms continue to crawl. The cycle of life has become a cycle of death and infection, and we are the only ones left to tell the story of the fall. The story of how a paradise was lost to a silent, unseen guest. The end of part 3 leaves us breathless and searching for a cure that may not exist in the laboratories of the modern men. The swamp is a patient that has been given a terminal diagnosis, and the clock is ticking loudly in the ears of the researchers. The silence of the marsh is the only answer we receive. It is a silence that tells us the time for talk is long over. The final war for the survival of the state has already begun, and the first casualties are the ones we were supposed to protect. The lungworm is the new master of the Florida undergrowth. It waits in the mud for the next breath of the next victim, and the next breath is always just a heartbeat away. The tragedy of the silent swamp is now a global biological reality. When an ecosystem collapses, desperate men take desperate measures. The decision was made to release a ghost back into the northern woods. They called upon the Eastern Indigo snake, the emperor of the pines, a creature made of gunmetal and midnight oil, reaching 9 feet long. The indigo had vanished from North Florida decades ago, lost to progress. But now, it is the only wall standing between the plague and the rest. It is a snake that hunts other snakes, a specialist in reptilian death. It does not fear the venom of the rattler or the bite of the copperhead. A secret breeding program raised these emperors in guarded silence. They waited for the moment when the environment needed a savior. Last year, the trucks rolled into the Apalachicola Bluffs at dawn. Volunteers carried the heavy snakes deep into the ancient longleaf pines. The footage of the release is haunting and strangely emotional. You see the iridescent blue scales vanish into a gopher tortoise burrow. The indigo has returned to its ancestral fortress to begin its reign. It is a gamble of massive proportions, a biological roll of the dice. Months passed with no sign of the released emperors in the wild. Biologists feared they had perished, unable to adapt to the hunt. But then, a trail camera snapped a photo that changed everything. It was a hatchling indigo, a wild-born child of the released kings. The emperors are breeding, establishing a beachhead against the dark. Now, the ultimate question hangs over the state like a guillotine. What happens when the indigo meets the invading Burmese python? The indigo cannot kill a monster, but it can devour its children. The indigo is a patrol car that never sleeps, an active, hungry hunter. If it can scour the forest floor and eat the baby pythons, there is hope. It could be the firewall that saves the northern counties from the crawl. But nature had another surprise waiting in the shadows of Big Cypress. The resistance is not just coming from labs, it is coming from the locals. A trail camera captured a bobcat walking into the frame of a python nest. Usually, a cat avoids a snake of that size to stay among the living. But this bobcat, a male of 25 pounds, did not turn away. The cat realized the giant female was sluggish, distracted by her eggs. He went to work with a ferocity that defied the laws of the swamp. The camera showed him dodging strikes with lightning-fast reflexes. The python looked slow, a relic of another world being outclassed. The real shock was not the fight, but what the cat did afterward. He did not just kill, he began to feast on the eggs, one by one. He was destroying the future of the invasion in a single afternoon, and he was not the only one learning how to fight back in the dark. Footage from other sectors shows bobcats catching python carcasses. Catching is a high-level behavior, saving a kill for a later meal. It means the cats no longer see the snakes as threats, but as food. The native predators are finally waking up from their long slumber. Alligators are ambushing pythons in the reeds, reclaiming the water. Even the Florida panther, the rarest ghost, has been seen with a kill. The swamp is fighting back, evolving its tactics in a bloody theater. Biotic resistance is taking hold, but the clock is ticking for the state. The footage of the bobcat standing over the nest is a beacon of hope. It proves that the Everglades is not just a victim, but a fighter. But we must not be fooled by a few small victories in the mud. A few brave cats cannot consume 300,000 giants. The parasites are still moving. The worms are still choking the weak. The indigos are few in number, a thin blue line against the shadows. We are standing at a crossroads of evolution and total extinction. The Florida you once knew is gone, replaced by a permanent war. The aftermath is not something we watch. It is something we live. The creatures are changing their DNA to survive the new nightmare. The battle for the swamp is a coin toss with the world as the stake. Nature's way is always violent, messy, and completely unpredictable. Who wins the final war for the soul of the American wetlands? Is it the invisible parasite, the giant invader, or the native alliance? The answer is hidden in the dark water, waiting for the next strike. The swamp has not revealed all its secrets, and perhaps it never will. We are left to watch the monitors, waiting for the next frame of data. Every shadow on the screen could be a savior or a final executioner. The tension in the air is permanent, a staple of the Florida night. The story of the silent swamp is far from its final, dark chapter. As the sun sets over the sawgrass, the silence feels different now. It is no longer the silence of the dead, but the silence of an ambush. The predators are waiting, the invaders are hiding, and we are watching. The war continues in the dark, where the cameras cannot always follow. The future of the state will be decided in the mud and the pines. It is a story of survival, of loss, and of a nature that refuses to die. We are part of this ecosystem, and its fate is ultimately our own. The indigo and the bobcat are our last best hope in the wilderness. But the parasite is a shadow that is very hard to catch and kill. The balance is shifting, but it is impossible to see where it will land. We are chroniclers of a world in the middle of a violent rebirth. The Florida sun rises again, lighting up a landscape of war and hope. Every life lost is a tragedy, but every birth is a defiant victory. The Everglades is a resilient heart that is still beating in the dark. We must listen to its pulse, even when it is faint and weak. The story of the silent swamp is the story of our time, a story of a paradise lost and a struggle to find it once again. The shadows move, the water flows, and the eyes are watching us. The war for the Florida soul is far from being over tonight. We are the witnesses to the greatest biological struggle of our age, and we will continue to document every step of this dark journey. The silence of the swamp is finally beginning to speak to us, and the message it carries is one of caution, fear, and survival. The end is not written, but the ink is very dark and very thick. We wait for the next frame, the next kill, and the next hope. The Florida you knew is gone, but something new is taking its place, something tougher, bloodier, and more resilient than we ever imagined. The swamp is a fighter, and it is not going down without a fight. The final chapter is still out there, hidden in the longleaf pines. We will find it, or it will find us in the middle of the night. Until then, we watch the shadows and listen to the silent, dark air. If you believe the native resistance can reclaim the heart of Florida, leave a comment below. Tell us your thoughts on this biological war. If you want to track the darkest mysteries of the American wilderness, like this video and subscribe to the channel. The swamp is watching.